The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself, away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and, spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, "He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. You know, you probably do, that life can be hard. There are just those days, those things that happen in our lives, those phases we pass through where everything seems difficult. Whether it's calendars full of work that needs to get done and errands that need to be accomplished, dealing with illness or employment or financial difficulties, it seems everyone, no matter where, who, or how, have challenges in their life. That life can be hard. And whenever I start to have my own little pity party about how difficult my life is, it always helps me to recall and reflect upon the fact that at the time of Jesus, I think life was harder. That it was even more difficult. I mean, those who study that sort of thing tell us that, at that time, the infant mortality rate was incredibly high. And that by the time people reached their teenage years, about half of them had died already. That the average lifespan was 35 years. That was it. Which means I should have been gone about 10 ago, give or take. More give. But that those 35 years would be years of basically hard labor, trying to eke out a living, marked by extreme poverty. And if you had a disability on top of that, things were doubly hard. You were basically completely unable to do what needed to be done to survive at that time. I mean, if you were blind, you certainly couldn't plow a field or tend nets or go fishing. If you were lame, you couldn't work in the marketplace. You couldn't do any kind of anything that would involve mobility at all, and almost everything did. I mean, if you were mute, there's no way you could call out hawking your wares anywhere. You were really left to depend upon relatives and the alms that other poverty-stricken people might decide to offer you. There was certainly no ADA requirements to help you out by any stretch of the imagination. And if that wasn't enough, if you had a disability, people did not see you as someone who perhaps had a genetic problem or had been a victim of fate, but they saw it as a punishment from God in your life. That because you had sinned or your parents had sinned, you had this difficulty, this disease, this disability. And the greater the disability, clearly the greater the sinner you were. That's the way their minds put it together. And so you would become outcast in your little village of maybe no more than 300 people. Notorious. Not someone that anybody would really care too much about, to tell you honestly. Life was hard. And notice in that how beautifully, intimately, compassionately, gently Jesus treats the man in the gospel tonight who is mute, has a speech impediment, and is deaf. He's traveled to the Decapolis, so he's outside of Jewish territory. This man, whoever he was that Jesus we hear healing tonight, was someone who was not of the Jewish faith. And yet in his situation, where he is disabled, Jesus treats him with such kindness. You'll notice what he does. It's really touching if you think about it. He takes the man away by himself, away from any sorts of crowd, away from any sorts of embarrassment, away from any sorts of humiliation, especially since the man can in no way know what's about to happen to him. He touches the man's ears as if to say, we're going to deal with this. We're going to deal with this. He makes spittle, which was known to have healing properties. We know that even today, that it can be somewhat sanitizing. Dogs lick their wounds and whatnot. Touches the man's tongue as if to say, we're going to take with this too. And groans. And some scholars say that Jesus groans that the man could actually feel the vibrations of the prayer as he looked upward and said, "Ephatha, be opened." And I don't think we can imagine what that moment is like. I mean, to really enter into the story, try to imagine your life if you could not hear. If you couldn't hear ambient sounds, all those things that we rely so much upon about people coming up behind us or noise around us. If you could never hear children laughing or birds singing, or you could never hear music like what we get to enjoy every single day of our life. You could never hear anybody say, "I love you." And you yourself wouldn't even be able to speak forgiveness or kindness or sigh a prayer. I don't think we can even begin to enter into what that reality would be like. But for this man, it had been his reality. And suddenly, it's changed. Intimate, glorious, remarkable, miraculous, the moment that Jesus has with this man. Shortly after this story, there's the story where Jesus will cure a blind man. In very much the same way. He will take the blind man away by himself. He'll use his spittle to make mud and place it on the blind man's eyes. And suddenly he'll be able to see. Again, a life-changing moment that we probably have a very hard time entering into. And we know, of course, that Christ heals the lame in the Gospels. He takes all those disabilities, all those things that make human conditions so hard on people, and he addresses them. He fulfills Isaiah's prophecy today from our first reading. Isaiah is speaking to those who are coming back from being in exile, telling them that their joy will be like the joy of someone who can suddenly see, or someone who can suddenly hear, or someone who can suddenly speak, or suddenly leap for joy. That's what their experience will be like. But of course, as we've talked about before, all those miraculous things that Jesus does, as beautiful, as wonderful, as powerful as they are, for those who weren't blind or who could walk or who could hear, they were meant to be something more. They're meant to point towards and lead people towards deeper spiritual realities that we have to be sure we don't miss because of the wonder of the miracle or even the gentle compassion of Jesus. Because those moments are to call us to deeper, deeper life. I mean, Jesus restores hearing to those who have lost it in the hopes that those who have ears will be able to hear his word and be led to a different way of living. He gives sight back to the blind in the hope that those who can see will recognize in him and in what he does the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, that he is the Christ, the Son of God. And he heals the lame so that those who can walk will hopefully find the strength, the courage, the change in their life to be able to follow him, to walk his path and be nearer to him. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we will recognize that one or more or all of those healings are probably things we can all use in our life if we're to be honest with ourselves. I mean, we need the gift of sight. It's absolutely essential. And if we're going to be the people Christ calls us to be, we need more than just physical sight. Although sometimes we do make the mistake of writing off people or putting people aside based on physical appearance, based on race, based on height, based on shape, based on whatever that is. That's a mistake that we need our sight to be restored over. But beyond that, are we able to, or do we even try to look beneath the surface to see that in each and every person we meet is someone who is a fellow creature with us on this earth, whose life is hard in one way or another, that each and every one of us have hopes and dreams and need to be treated kindly and gently and compassionately, to see in each and every one of us a beloved son or daughter for whom Christ was willing to give his life, and to love them. It takes a different kind of sight for us to be able to do that. Ephathatha, be opened so that we can see in a different way. The gift of hearing is remarkable, and we absolutely need that in our Christian walk. At the spiritual level, there was a pastor, a German pastor and theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who once said, "The first service we owe to each other is to listen." Is to listen. Do we do that? Not just hear another person, but listen to them. I don't know about you, but I find in my life so often when situations get difficult and there need to be hard conversations, I know what I want to say and how I'm going to say it. And I'm going to make sure that it gets heard, even if I never listen to the other person. What if in those difficult moments, our first position was, let me listen. Let me try to understand. Let me enter into what you are saying so that I can respond to that, so I can try to comprehend where you are at in your life, in your thing. And then let me share compassionately with you what I have to say. Do we even try to put ourselves aside enough to provide that first service of listening to another person? And do we listen to God? Do we listen to God? I mean, every week here in the church, God's word is proclaimed, a first reading, a psalm, a second reading, a gospel. Every week, if not me, if deacons, someone offers a homily, something to hopefully help us on our spiritual journey. Every week, the story of our salvation is retold at this altar in the Eucharistic prayer. Do we listen to God? We are told, I've been told, I've heard, I've read, I don't remember where, but that the beginning of the ability to love God comes through listening to Him. Listening to Him. Do you make space in your life to listen to God? Ephathatha. We need to be opened so that we can hear, we can listen in new ways. I think if we cut off ourselves in any other way, we, in essence, leave ourselves lame, unable to follow Christ the way that He asks us to. In reality, for each and every one of us, Christ is willing and able to take us aside to some private place where our own personal disabilities, our own personal woundedness, our hurt, our lack of seeing, our lack of listening can be addressed. If we will ever be the people He needs us to be, we have to recognize our brokenness and our need for Him. We have to recognize our need for His command in our life. Ephathatha, be open.